Good morning, everybody. It's Peter here from AJS, and it's my very distinct privilege to welcome Kirra-lea Caynes this morning. And she's doing another in her sandcasting series. And Kirra-lea, you're coming to us from a lovely little studio there. Where are you this morning?
Yes, I'm at Sean and Maben's Artisan Jeweler studio in Moona, which is just outside of Hobart. She's been very generous in letting me occupy her studio to try and get some last minute customs done and demonstrations like this, because I'm a bit homeless at the moment, being trapped outside of my hometown of Melbourne. But I will be going back very soon.
That's great. And that's very obliging of your friend to allow you to be there this morning and hence allow this demonstration to continue. And you also have another little shout out.
I do. So anybody who's watched my previous videos might notice that my hair looks a little bit different today. Normally it's a bit wild. I just chuck it up in a messy bun. But turns out my grandfather has been watching these videos from Facebook, and he let me know that maybe I should tidy my hair up because it looks really messy. So I thought I'd give a shout out to Poppy. Hello, thank you for watching, and I hope you like the up style I chose today. It's a little bit neater, so maybe I'll be doing this going forward in my videos.
I'm sure you'll love it. Well done for listening to Poppy as well. And Poppy, if you've got any tips for me, I'll gladly take them on board also. Some people think I've got rocks in their head, but anyway. Yeah. Okay, Kirra-lea. So today we're doing cast in place faceted stones flush style. Would you like to explain to everybody what we're going to get up to today?
Sure thing. So the flush style just means that the metal is going to be flush with the surface. The stones are going to be flush with the surface of the metal. So very similar to your traditional stone setting where you have a rub-in style stone. I think some people call them gypsy set. It's getting that style, that look across, but this is going to be cast in place. So I call it cast in place flush style, just because that's what it is. The stones table is usually at the same level as the rest of the metal is.
We're casting the stone at the same time as you're doing the rest. So
That's it.
What are the difficulties, or what can and can't you do when you're doing this particular function?
Well, casting in place stones is a bit tricky, particularly the faceted stones, because you have to make sure that the metal is going to wrap around the widest part of the stone, which is the girdle. And with the smaller stones, the girdles are very small. And with the bigger stones, the girdle is a little bit bigger, so you have a bit more room for error. But with the small stones, you pretty much got to get them in the exact right position. Otherwise, they'll either be engulfed by the metal or they'll be sitting on top of the metal and they'll just flick out. The other problem is you've got to make sure they absolutely are adhered in place with the pawpaw ointment or Vaseline, whatever you're using. Otherwise, the metal just gets in there and just bullies them and just knocks them all out of the way, because they are a smooth surface on a smooth surface of sand, so they just slide out of the way. So without that adhesion, you can open up your flask after casting and find all of your stones have been pushed into the middle, which can look really cool if that's the look you're going for. But it can really ruin your day if you've got a deadline and a commission and that's not what the client's expecting.
Okay, so I'm sure there's a few little vital tips and tricks along the way that will be very important for us to do this process properly. So where do we begin, Kirra-lea?
All right, we begin like we always begin, with our flask. And this is the flask that you'll get with a Delft clay kit if you purchase one from AJS. It comes with this aluminium flask, and it comes with 2 kilograms of clay. But what your flask does not come with is this giant hole cut in the side of it. That's something that you will have to do yourself. It's really easy to do. You just get in there with your jeweler's saw and just cut out a square or circle, whatever you want. Maybe you've got a handy friend who's got some power tools that can just cut a nice circle in there for you. I did these manually. But for this very first one, I'm going to be demonstrating doing a pendant and casting it in the horizontal orientation style. So we'll be pouring the metal through the top part here. And as always, we start with the male half first, lip side down. We're going to pack it from behind. So the reason why we're packing it from behind is because I'm going to be compressing this clay with a hammer, and that hammer is going to slightly damage that aluminium frame. But because it's on the outside of the frame, it doesn't matter. But if I was to bang my hammer on that lip, eventually my two flasks would not fit together properly, and I'd either have to get rid of them and get another one, or I'd have to spend a bit of time fixing it up. So for the longevity of your flask at home, just make sure you're packing it from behind. Sorry, it's going to bump around a little bit. Now I've got my ruler. The ruler is great for scraping all that clay out of your working space. It's also great for cutting off all that excess clay on the back of that flask, because we don't want it concave, we don't want it convex, we want it flush and flat, because we're about to press an object into this side and we need this backside to be supported. So if I push into it, I don't want that clay to give way. I want it to be nice and supported and to pick up a really great impression of the object I'm pushing into it. So let's talcum powder up this surface. So it doesn't have to be talcum powder. It can be corn flour. It can be baking flour that you'd bake a cake with. But I use talcum powder because I just went and bought a giant container of talcum powder, and now that's it. I've just got to use it all up. So when I've used it up, maybe I'll use corn flour.
Don't use the talcum powder in your cooking, though.
No, please don't. So I'm going to be casting this little washer. The great thing about making molds with sand casters, you can make a mold of anything. So I just went into my my partner's tool shed and rummaged through his bags of old bits, and I found a whole heap of washers that I thought, you know what, that's quite a nice shape. So I'm going to make a pendant today using a washer. I'm going to place that about in the middle of my flask. It doesn't have to be in the middle, but you know, about the middle. I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to press that washer into the clay. I like to use the ruler because it helps to disperse the pressure more evenly, and it stops your fingers from pushing in on the clay. Keeps your fingers out of it. You've got to keep this nice and clean. All right, let's put our lady flask on top. My registration mark is now that giant hole that I've cut in the side of it. If you have a flask that is unaltered, you'll have just a little mark that you'll line up. But in this case, I'm using the giant hole. Let's get some loose crumbly bits of clay and let's pack that down with my fingers. Make sure it's all nice and tightly packed around that object. This object doesn't really have much detail to pick up, but it doesn't hurt to get into a habit so that you are doing it every single time. And let's cut off that extra clay that we don't need. When we open up this flask, we're not going to twist it open. We're going to open it nice and evenly. And one of the features of these flasks is they actually have a little gap that you can fit your tweezers into and lever it open. There we go. I am going to push this washer in deeper into this side, and I'm going to push it deeper into the other side as well, because the washer is maybe 1.5 mil, and I need it to be a bit deeper than that to accommodate the stones that I'm about to put inside of this impression. So you have to make sure that your object impression can accommodate the depth of your stones. You don't really want the culé of the stone, the pointy part of the stone, sticking through the other side of your casting. Usually means it's uncomfortable to wear. Now, at this stage, you have to curb your excitement and don't place stones yet. What you're going to do is you're going to create a sprue hole and funnel. So you've got to have a little bit more work before you can play. The reason why you do that is because, first of all, you might not know where your placing your stones on the opposite side, and you do need to place your sprue in a spot that hopefully will not go on top of your stones. The other thing is, if you're placing stones on both sides of the mold, you don't want to spend all that time precariously placing stones on one side and then remember you have to do a sprue hole and funnel and do all that extra work and potentially dislodge all your hard work and your stones fall out. So just do the work first and then play after. I'm going to pop mine right here. I'm going to go all the way through. Doesn't matter which side, because I'm using a washer which doesn't have a front or back. I can decide which is going to be the front or back of my design. And I've decided that this is a nice clean impression and that's going to be the front of my design, where this is a little bit more of a shallow impression. So I'm going to say that's the back of my design, which is where I'm putting my sprue hole and where I'm going to do my funnel. Let's get out knifey tool. So let's carve that funnel out. And what we're looking for in a funnel is depth. So we want to come down close to our impression. Width is not really too much of a problem. It's just something you have to aim for when you're pouring molten metal. So do keep that in mind. The bigger the target, the easier it is to hit. But what we really need is the depth, because we don't want that silver bottlenecking for any longer than it has to. Because while it's bottlenecking, it's rapidly cooling down. I like to use the back of my paintbrush like a rolling pin to smooth down that funnel. It's really important to make sure you don't have any loose bits of clay that could potentially follow your molten metal into your form and really either mar the surface of it by leaving pits and craters, or it can get trapped inside of your form and become horrible porosity. That's just a cavity filled with burnt clay. So make sure you control that by just cleaning up your funnel and your sprue hole. Make sure they're nice and clean, no loose bits of clay. If you feel like you've disturbed your impression, you can always put your object back in and crisp it up again, just to make sure it is a nice clean impression. There we go. I'm going to set that to the side now, and now I'm going to place some stones on this side. This is where your pawpaw ointment is going to come in handy, or Vaseline, or whatever sort of goop you're going to use, and also a pair of fine nose tweezers, usually stone tweezers. I did get a bunch of lock-in tweezers. I found that was actually a pain in the backside, so I would suggest using tweezers that do not have the lock-in. Pull that out. I've got a bunch of sapphires here, and I'm just going to lay down a whole heap of stones. So it's going to be sort of just covered, really. I do have to keep in mind that the metal will be poured in at this section here. How I know that is that I've placed my sprue hole here, which correlates to my registration mark. So I'm able to find where that metal is poured in on the other side very easily, because I know there's my registration mark. My metal will be poured into this section here. I'm going to try and avoid placing stones up here. I'm going to predominantly have them down here. Let's pick up one of these sapphires and let's get just a tiny little bit of pawpaw ointment on the table of that stone. Doesn't have to be much. I'm not sure if you can see that, probably not. It's just a teeny tiny amount on the table of that stone, so the flat part of the stone. And I'm just going to lay it down on that clay. It's important not to get pawpaw ointment on your tweezers. If you do, just clean them off. I like to just rub them on my shirt. So my stone's placed there at the moment. All I have to do is just give it a little bit of a push on its backside to make sure that it is in contact with that clay. I'm not pushing the stone into the clay. I'm just making sure it's in contact with the clay, and that's all I need to do. The most important part of the faceted stones and casting them in place is you need to be able to see the girdle of the stone. If you can see the girdle of the stone, it means that the silver can wrap around that girdle and hold it in place, and your stone will be securely set. If your girdle is beneath the clay, that means the stone's just going to be sitting on top of the silver, and it's just going to pop right out when you go to clean up. So you do have to be quite I guess particular and mindful. I'm going to go for another little stone, just a little bit of pawpaw on the table of that stone. I'll probably go a little bit more. And let's pop that in the flask. And again, I'm just giving it a little gentle push to make sure it's in contact with the clay. It's kissing the surface of the clay and it's not doing anything more than that. And let's go again. I'll do just a few of them. So it's an even littler stone this time. I find I can do all the way down to 1 mil stones. I have not tried anything smaller than 1 mil though.
So how did you get on the pawpaw ointment?
I was looking for things to make it work and it was on my bench because I put it on my lips. And so I gave it a go and it worked. So I just haven't even looked at anything else.
There you go. You saw it first?
Yeah.
Right here. Sales of pawpaw ointment are just about to spike in Australia.
Yes, that's right. Maybe. I'm just going to do one more stone. You know what? 4 is not a good number. Let's go for 5. Because odd numbers usually look best when it comes to jewelry. Let's go for one more. Oh, that's a bit too much pawpaw. Just a little bit. There we go. 5 stones. That's a great number. So it's not particularly great quality visuals today. Sorry, guys. But what you need to...
there. That's fine.
Okay, good. What you need to know is that I did not push these stones into the clay. I've laid them onto the clay and then I've just given them a little bit of a push to make sure that that table is in full contact, that it is flat and flush against that clay. That's all I've done.
So just before you go on, Kirra-lea, just got a couple of comments for you. Alice has asked, do the same rules apply as with non-sand casting in terms of what stones you can use? So it can only be sapphires or diamonds or similar, since others will be ruined from the heat.
I haven't done very much lost wax casting with casted play stones. I would say have a discussion with your casting house and what they would suggest to use. I find some casting houses will just say yes, they'll do anything, and then it's all care, no responsibility. Other casting houses have a bit better guarantee, and they'll have, I guess, more restrictions. They'll let you know what will work and won't work, and won't work. Really, just have a discussion with your casting house, and they should be able to guide you. If you find a good casting house, they'll want to make sure that the pieces are guaranteed to come out, and so they will let you know what pieces, what stones to use in what way and how it will work, because they need to fulfill their guarantee, I guess.
Alice has just given us a little clarification. She said, sorry, I meant in terms of what will work for sand casting.
So rules that apply to lost wax, are they applied to sand casting? Okay. I'd say you could probably get away with a bit more with the sand casting, maybe, just because the flask is not being heated up to a few 100 degrees, and depends on the casting house. Sometimes they will quench the investment mold to explode the investment off of the casting tree, and that can put stones into thermal shock. So sand casting is a gentler process. It can be. Oh, look, just give it a go. If you've got some stones that you don't mind, if they break, then give it a go. Don't experiment with things that cost too much money. As a rule, aquamarine is not really meant to work for cast in place, but I have experimented with the ornamental quality, like the mineral style quality aquamarine, and I'm able to cast that in place successfully without damaging the stone. So it's all about experiments, I guess. Sorry, I don't have a clear answer for you.
That's okay. Kirra-lea, can you do it with diamonds?
Yes, 100%.
Beautiful. So Cassia asked that. Thanks for your question, Cassia. And Alice said, thank you, great info. So thank you very much.
Awesome. All right, back into it.
Indeed, let's go.
Fantastic. I haven't had a coffee this morning, so I'm really feeling it. My words are getting all mixed up. Apologies. So I have stones that are all laid down. I have my sprue hole. I have my funnel. The last thing I'm going to do before I close this up and cast is add some air vents. I know that I want the metal to pour in through this hole here, shoot around that center part, and crash and meet in the middle right here. And that's where I'm going to place my air vent, because I really want to use that vacuum that the air creates as it's escaping. I'm using that to draw the silver to the places I think are hard to reach. Done. So I've just done a little channel, and then I've poked it out the top there, and I've just opened it up a little bit so that if I do place this glass down and pick it up again, it's still open. Let's close this up. So it's always a good idea to check what your stones are doing to the other side of the flask before you go cast. So let's close it up and make sure that those stones do have enough room. I'm just going to give the clay a little bit of a push with my thumbs and my fingers just to make sure those two clay halves really are flush together. Let's open that up again. And I'm checking to see if there's any indentation from the Kirra-lea of those stones, and there is none. So they've definitely got enough clearance. The metal's got enough room to flow behind them and completely encapsulate them. Let's close that up again. And we'll go over to the other monitor now and cast. Safety glasses are a must for when you're casting or working with a torch at all. I have LPG gas and oxygen set up. I've got to do it so you can see right there. Okay. Let's move everything over so I'm doing it all where you can see it. What have I got on here? Size 5 tip. All right, that's not correct. Let's put on a different tip. We need something a bit bigger than that. I think I've got a modified tip over here somewhere. There we go. So Sean has modified this tip for melting. There we go.
So how did he modify it, Kirra-lea?
Yeah, so she's just chopped off the end of it, and she possibly burred it out a little bit. So this is what they normally look like. I'm not sure if you can see that, but they normally have a tapered end.
Okay.
So she's chopped off the tapered ends, so it's just a bigger hole. So you have a bigger flame. That's really easy to do. Okay, so I have my LPG gas, I have my oxygen, and I've got this nifty little device here that's to ignite. So you just press on the little gold button and a little spark comes out in this cage here, and that's what's going to ignite my gas, just like that. How good. I'll put that to the side because I don't want to melt it. Now, I know from experience that when I get this flame up and loud and hissing, you guys can't hear what I'm saying. So I'll just run through a few things right now. Pretty much you want to get your flame as hot as it possibly can get. So even if that means you're going to have a few goes of turning this torch on to as much as it can go and then it blows itself out. So do that a few times until you find the sweet spot just before it blows itself out. That'll be the hottest that your torch can go. You can also readjust your regulators so that they let out a little bit more force. What I'm going to be doing is melting down this metal, this silver. I'm going to be getting it to what they call a rolling melt, which means that when I roll the metal around, it's not going to stick to the edges of the crucible. It's going to roll around in one whole blob. And then when it gets to that stage, I know it's hot enough that I can melt, that I can cast with it. My crucible is seasoned with borax, which means that I've already glazed this ceramic bowl with borax. I don't need to add any extra to it. And because I'm using relatively clean metal, again, I don't need any extra borax. If I was melting down a bunch of old chains and grandma's jewelry, I might need to add a bit of borax to clean that metal up. But for what we're doing today, don't need any extra. The other thing to keep in mind, you got to dump the metal down real quick. Don't pour it down slowly. You got to do it really quick in one smooth motion. So let's get into it. Done. This is the part where it gets a bit smoky. So putting on a mask is a good idea. Also having good extraction. So I'm going to pop on the extraction now, and hopefully that's not going to be too loud, but I can turn it off if it is. Okay, Peter?
Sure.
How's that?
No, that's fine.
Fantastic. Let's go back over to this other monitor. Smoky. Immediately after casting, we can open up this flask because the heat is being contained by this clay. So it's a fantastic insulator. So let's open that up. Pop it over and have a look. Wonderful. What's that? Bit of burnt clay? Yeah. Let's get that out. So there's a little bit of spillage. So my line of parting is quite large, but I don't mind. I know I can get around that by saw piercing it. So the reason why that's happened is because I pressed that washer deeper in both sides and it's really separated those two clay halves. So that's unfortunate that it did it so much that even the center is filled in. But it's not a problem for me because I can just saw pierce it out. What I do have though is perfectly cast in place stones. One of my sapphires did crack though. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of a crack there. And that's the risk with all stones when you're casting them in place. Yeah, it is cracked. But 4 of them are good. What I would do is use a diamond burr and I'd burr this guy out and then I'd hammer set a new stone into that one. That's how I would get around the broken stones. Or I'd just sell it with a broken stone. Just make sure that the buyer is aware that it's broken.
Part of the story, Kirra-lea.
Pardon? Yeah, part of the story. Yeah. So they are all very securely cast in place. I cannot see the girdles at all. If I was a little bit worried, I could go around the stones with a little setting burnisher just to make sure that silver is tightly pressed around those girdles. And the stones are not poking through behind. Success. Mostly success. I mean, it's a little bit of a messy a messy casting, unfortunately. Sorry, guys.
No,
But that's
sure
because I
people can
needed
see
the
past
depth.
that.
Yes, please see past that. Castings that you have cast in place stones do not quench. So do not put your fresh, hot casting with stones into cold water or any water or any like liquid. Just let it cool down naturally. Just pop it onto a stone somewhere and let it cool down.
What's a possible scenario if you did that?
Oh, they shatter. They really don't appreciate. They really don't appreciate going from a few hundred degrees. I think it's like close to 800 degrees or something, down to lukewarm, lukewarm water. They do not appreciate that sudden change, so they will shatter.
Yeah, that's a bit of a different story to explain to your customer.
Yeah, that's right. It's not really part of the journey, is it? All right, burnt clay. Just scrape all that burnt clay out. And all the rest of that clay we can reuse in our next mold. So the next one I'm going to be doing will be a ring. And I'll be using this flask in a vertical orientation, which means I'll be pouring through that giant hole I've cut inside of this flask. So it's quite easy to cast in place stones in a pendant, relatively easy anyway, because it's very easy to get at, it's very easy to see what you're doing. It's a little bit trickier when it comes to the casting the ring, because you're going to be placing stones on a vertical wall. So it's a little bit tricky to get into, it's a little bit tricky to see. But I'll show you how to do it. Let's fill up our nail flask, lip down, packing it from behind. I'm using my fingers to pack that clay down around that surface to make sure it's all nice and flat and filled in. Now I can just use handfuls of clay to pack the rest of it in and use a hammer. I have my ruler to cut off any of that extra clay on the back of it. And that's my surface. Let's
We've got the opportunity, Kirra-lea, just a shout out to Robert, who's one of our regulars. It's good to have you back, Robert, and thanks for your comments along the way. Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Just tack and patted up that surface. And this is a wax that I made a little while ago. So it's got a smooth outside, but the sides of it are quite rough and organic. I'm just playing with the idea of mixed textures. So my idea is I'm going to be placing some stones along the top half of this ring. Because we'll be casting through the side, I have to be mindful about where I'm placing my ring. In this case, it doesn't really matter because the ring is relatively symmetrical, the same, like nothing's going on. So I can place that ring wherever I want. Where if I had a signet ring, I would make sure that the signet top was down the base, down the bottom, and that the sprue was going to be fed in through the shank. But I don't have to worry with this one. It is just essentially a plain round ring, and I can place it in any way. So I've got it pretty much in the middle. I'm going to use my ruler to push it into about halfway. Now let's put our female half of the flask on top, lining up that great big hole. And let's pack it with some loose crumbly clay. Just pushing it down with my fingers first to make sure all of that clay is tightly packed around my object, picking up all of that detail and pattern. And then I can just put handfuls in and hammer it. Tidy up our space with the ruler. Cut off the extra clay with this ruler.
Just on the hammering, Kirra-lea, Robert has asked, could you use a rawhide hammer for that? You can
use whatever hammer you want. I use the chasing hammer because it's got a large flat head. That's the only reason why I use it. You can use whatever hammer you want. Let's open that up. There we go. So again, just like before, let's not get overly excited and place stones yet. Let's do a little bit of work. Let's create our sprue hole and funnel. And with the vertical casting style, it's really simple. I've just changed the way I do my sprue and funnel because I've been watching some videos from Craig Dabler. He's an American sandcaster and he's got some fantastic videos. And he taught me, put my thumb in there and pull that to the side. So that's now become my funnel. And now I'm using the back of a paintbrush, which is about 6 millimeters in diameter. I'm just gonna place that down. So that's my sprue. It is very quick.
Thumbs up for that one, Kirra-lea.
Yes, thumbs up. Let's pull this one out. And again, pop the thumb in there. And back of the paintbrush. Just like that. So simple. There we go. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Absolutely, we need our purple ointment. I have an assortment of sapphires here. I always like to start with the center stone and work my way around. So let's have a look at our stones and see what we can fit in. So I do have this really large sapphire, and let me see if that'll fit. I'm kind of hoping it doesn't fit so I can show you guys what not to do. Yep, okay. Don't know if you can see that, but the cule of that stone, the pointy part of the stone, would actually be poking in on the finger. And for the potential wearer of that ring, that's really uncomfortable to have all the pokey parts of the stone sticking through the ring and scraping on your knuckles every time you pull the ring off and on your finger. So don't do that. Find stones that are the right size for the ring that you're making. So I'm going to choose a smaller stone, something that's cut a little bit shallower. I'm going to put a little bit of pawpaw on the table of that stone, and I'm going to lay it on that vertical surface. And I'm just gonna, again, I've laid it on there, and now all I'm gonna do is give it a gentle push to make sure it is adhered to that surface. That's all. I'm not pushing it through that clay wall. I'm just making sure it is in full contact. I'm not sure if you can see that. This wasn't actually a clever idea, choosing a black stone, was it?
No, we've got an idea, no worries. All
right, I'll pick some light colored ones. At the moment, if I was to place just stones on this half, it means that my ring, when I cast it, is only going to have stones on one half of the ring. And I want it to look like it's got stones on both halves. I'm going to place some stones on this side and some stones on this side, so that when I put them together, I have 3 stones on one side, 2 on the other. I'll place it together and they'll be much more even. It'll be balanced. So I've laid 1 stone down on this side, and I'm going to lay 2 on either side of where it would be. I'm going to go for some, maybe I'll do some green ones so that you guys can see a little bit better what I'm doing. Let's get some pawpaw on that stone. Just a little bit on the table of the stone. Now I know that my center stone is placed right in the middle on that side, which means I'm not going to place this green stone right in the middle on this side. I'm going to do it to the right hand side, just next to it. And again, just placing it in there and then giving it a little bit of a push to make sure it's stuck to that surface, but no more. let's do 2 more stones because odd numbers are best. So let's do 3 more stones. Pop that one in there. And let's do a few more little blue ones. So I'm going to place the little blue ones on this side now. So I'm alternating them. Let's go for 1 more little blue stone. Drop him. Pull him out and do that again. Make sure he's got pawpaw on him because I think I just knocked that off. There we go. Let's pop him in. So I have 3 stones on this side and I have 2 on this side. It's always a good idea to close your flask and check that the stones don't knock each other out of the way. So as I'm closing, I've lined up that registration mark here. And as I'm closing, I'm peeking inside of it to see if those stones are going to touch each other. Looks like they're all clear of each other, but let's close it up and open it and make sure all the stones are in the positions that we've placed them. I'm going to give it a light little pat to make sure that those 2 clay halves are flush. Let's open it up again. Cool. Those stones are all behaving. They're in the positions that I originally placed them. Nobody's causing problems.
Just on those stones, Robert's just asked about the metal flow around them. So there still is enough room for the metal to flow around them, correct?
Yes, yes. So for the same reason why I'm not choosing a large stone for the center, I want to have some room for the metal to flow behind the stone. So I find about 1 mil is, or even 0.5 is great, but metal doesn't like to flow in 0.5 when we're sand casting. So usually 1 mil is what you can get away with. The other thing is that I know that this stone is not producing out of this clay half very much. So I know that my stone is going to be, the center stone is going to be more to one side. So not only can the metal flow around the top of that stone, it can also flow underneath the stone. So that's something to be mindful of. Don't choose stones that are too big because they can just block the flow of your metal. Let's create an air vent, close this up and cast. I'm just going to do an air vent there and an air vent there on either side of that center stone. I'm going to poke through. Doesn't matter what side you do air vents because your sprue hull and funnel are on both sides of the flask. The other thing is, closing this up, we're going to be pouring from that giant hole in the side, which means that the flask is going to be sitting up like this so the air can escape from this side or this side. So it doesn't matter which half you decide to put your air vents in. Just give that a little squeeze and make sure that the clay is nice and tightly packed together. Okay, let's go over to our other monitor and melt this.
Just a question from
Yes.
there for you, Kirra-lea. Have you ever dropped any stones inside the pawpaw?
Oh, I have, but I've been able to get them out. I have also had students do the same thing, and whether they come out while that student's still working or not, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure I've had some people in a class using the pawpaw and then exclaiming that there is a stone in their pawpaw. So it has definitely been sucked up before and left in there. Yes.
Oh, there's another story for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Stone-bearing pawpaw ointment.
We did just have a comment just before you start there. Before one of our viewers wanted to know about getting a list of the critical tools that she'd need to use to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't know if this is going to help or not, but I do have a YouTube video where I've mentioned all the tools I like to use for casting, and I've run through what each of them are and where I could get them from. So maybe check that out if that's helpful. Otherwise, maybe Peter, I could send you a link and it can go in the comments later.
Yeah, we could do that.
Wonderful. So you might notice that because I'm casting vertical, I have my flask wedged between these two bricks. Now, there are apparatuses out there that are designed to hold your flask in this orientation, but you have to spend money on them. When it comes to bricks, you can pull them out of your garden. They're off the side of the road. They're usually free. So up to you on what you want to use. You have to be mindful that your flask is up and down so that your metal will hit that center finger part and it will split evenly and flow down. Oh, how can I do this? I can't, sorry. So you want the metal to go straight down, hit that center finger part, split evenly and pull together down the bottom of your ring. If you have your flask on a bit of an angle, that metal is not going to want to go down both sides of the flask. It's going to want to just go down the one side, and then the metal's going to pull down the bottom and not want to go uphill. Metal's really lazy and it won't travel uphill. So you do have to make sure that your flask is nice and straight, that the metal is going to be split evenly and gravity is going to pull that metal down on both sides. Let's get into it. Put our little thingy. I will say it's pretty much exactly the same casting in this orientation. The only thing is you might not need as much metal, and you might not need to pour as fast because gravity is doing a lot of work for us in this case, because we're pouring the metal in and it's just going straight down. Whereas when we're casting horizontal, this is your object and we're pouring metal straight here, and the pour metal has to do a 90-degree angle to get into your form. So we have to make sure the metal is piping hot, throw it down there really quick so that it's as molten as it can be to reach everything. But when it comes to the vertical, your object is already vertical and you're placing your sprue right there. So all it has to do is the metal just goes straight down. Gravity is helping us the whole time. So you don't have to throw the metal down the hole nearly as fast. It's still good to do it fast and all in one go though. Let's get this set up. Wonderful. Mask on and extraction on. And let's go over to the other camera. So do not not open your flask like this because your flask is going to roll out and be quite dangerous. So place your flask down like this in the horizontal orientation and then open it. This way your fresh hot cask is not going to roll out and touch your finger.
Well, you've got a hole in the middle of this one, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, it's a good sign. Cool. So these are my 2 air vents. Let's turn this extraction off. Now it's not smoking. There we go. So these are my 2 air vents that the metal did travel up. And a little bit of metal has gone over this center stone, made it look like an oblong shape. I'm not too fussed though. I could either leave it like that because it's organic and interesting, or I could get in there with my flat engraver and I could just carve back a little bit of that metal to expose the stone a little bit more. So let's have a look. This little stone did crack. I am using quite low grade sapphires, so it's to be expected. So again, I'd either leave it like that and sell it with the client knowing that it's a broken stone, or I could use a diamond burr to get that stone out and hammer set something in that's not broken. This one's cast in place nicely. The center stone's nice. Side stone's nice. This little guy here, I'm a little bit concerned about because I can see his girdle poking through metal just here. So I'd be a little bit worried about the security of that stone. He's gone on a bit of an angle, which is not what I anticipated. So either the pawpaw wasn't in there on the hem properly and he's moved, or maybe it was when I closed the flask the second time he moved. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll melt little balls of silver and I'll solder them next to the stone to make sure that they are that stone is secure in place and that those little beads are acting as like little claws. Or I'll carefully remove the stone, burr it out, and reset it in on a correct angle. Depends on how much work I feel like doing. But otherwise, that's looking pretty good. And so you can see where I've placed stones on both sides of the flask. It's doing this sort of zigzagging look where the stones are placed. Quite nice. It almost looks like they're scattered, which is a really cool look. The more you work with cast in place stones, the more precise you can get. But it is quite tricky to be precise because we are working with some pretty strange techniques on some strange angles. But with some persistence, it can totally be done. That's about it for today, Peter, unless we have any more questions.
Just come back to you. Here we go.
Yeah.
And yes, we have a good audience there. So if you have any questions or comments, that'd be most appreciated. And
yeah, happy to answer.
The main thing with jewelry making, though, Kirra-lea, is you always need a plan B, don't you? Because things don't always go according to plan, and you need to be able to adjust and change tack.
That's right, and that's very true with sand casting. I try to tell people when they're creating not to be too fixated on what they think the outcome's going to be, that they should just bake something, and then whatever comes out of the clay, they can turn it into something else if they want to. Don't get too upset if it's not exactly what they had planned, because it might not be wrong. It's just not what they thought. You know, like it's a project that they hadn't thought of yet, or a design that they hadn't conceived yet, and they just have to work with what comes out of the clay. But you know, I completely understand people being disappointed when things don't go to how they'd imagined them.
For people who like getting gifts, this is the ideal hobby, isn't it? Because you know, every time you open one, it's like opening a gift, and you don't know
yes.
what you're going
exactly.
to get. So, yeah.
Exactly, and I love that. I love that every time I open flask, I'm not sure how the stones are going to be wrapped around in that silver. Sometimes things go horribly wrong, but in quite a beautiful way. I don't know if you guys can see, but this is a pendant I made yesterday in a class. It has 3 sapphires, rough sapphires. It was actually just one whole rough sapphire, but it exploded in the flask when the molten metal hit it, and it broke into 3 pieces that were then encapsulated in that moment of explosion, which is really beautiful in itself. And I'd never be able to recapture that. That was a complete accident. Sometimes they don't explode in very pretty ways, but in this case it did, and I'm thrilled with the results, and it was not something I planned at all.
There you go. Yeah, that's a bonus. So, Kirra-lea, lots of lovely comments. I won't go through them all, but thank you, Fliss, Cassia, Donna, Takiri, and Robert and others for your comments and appreciation of this morning's demonstration and Kirra-lea's talents and your communication skills and getting them across to us, Kirra-lea. So really appreciate it.
I don't feel particularly articulate today. I will make sure to eat breakfast and have a coffee next time. But thank you all the same.
Yeah, well done. And Kirra-lea, we'll look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Absolutely.
Okay. Bye, everyone.